I was born on Coruscant, in the mid-levels where the sunlight filters through layers of speeder traffic and industrial smog, turning everything the color of old brass. My father was a communications analyst for the Imperial Security Bureau, third-tier clearance, the kind of man who processed intelligence reports without ever learning what they meant. My mother died when I was 6, a speeder accident in the lower levels, though my father never spoke of it, and I learned not to ask. He raised me alone in our small apartment overlooking a maintenance shaft, teaching me to read encryption patterns before I could properly read BASIC, showing me how information flowed through the Empire's vast networks, like blood through veins. "The Empire runs on information, Mara," he told me, his face illuminated by data streams. "Not star destroyers, not stormtroopers, information. Know what's being said, and you know what's being hidden." I was a quiet child, bookish, the kind who preferred the company of datapads to other children. The other kids in our housing block called me Ghost, because I moved silently, spoke rarely, and seemed to appear in places without warning. I didn't mind. I learned early that invisibility was power, that those who watched without being watched held advantages others couldn't imagine. My father noticed, encouraged it, trained me in observation techniques he'd learned in ISB preliminary courses. By the time I was 12, I could decrypt basic Imperial codes, identify intelligence officer tells, and map communication hierarchies from casual conversations. He wanted me to join the ISB, to follow his path, but higher, better, to become the analyst he'd never been. I wanted to please him, wanted to see pride in his eyes instead of the distant sadness that had lived there since my mother died. So I studied. I memorized protocols, learned 7 languages, practiced encryption algorithms until my fingers moved faster than conscious thought. When I turned 16, I applied to the ISB Academy on Coruscant, and my father hugged me for the first time in years, his hands trembling against my back. "You'll be safe there," he whispered, "safe in the information. No one can hurt you if you know everything." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. The ISB Academy was located in the security sector, a fortress of gray durasteel and paranoia, where every hallway had surveillance, every conversation was recorded, and trust was a weakness to be exploited. They broke us down in the first month, psychological evaluations, loyalty tests, scenarios designed to reveal cracks in our commitment to Imperial order. I watched cadets disappear overnight, reassigned or expelled or worse, and learned the first lesson of intelligence work. Everyone is suspect, including yourself. I excelled. My scores in cryptography, pattern analysis, and behavioral prediction placed me in the top 5% of my class. They assigned me to communications, intelligence, the department that monitored internal Imperial transmissions for irregularities, treason, inefficiency. It was tedious work, processing thousands of routine military reports, searching for anomalies that almost never appeared. But I was good at it, better than good. I could spot a falsified patrol report from the timestamp inconsistencies, identify smuggling operations from requisition patterns, predict supply chain failures from minor logistical deviations. My instructors noticed. Commander Yendrick, a thin woman with eyes like broken glass, called me to her office during my 2nd year. "You have a talent, Cadet Viren," she said, studying me with the intensity of someone looking for weaknesses. "A talent for seeing what others miss. That talent will take you far in the Bureau if you can learn to trust only the Emperor and your own analysis. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, meaning it. "Good, because I'm assigning you to a special project. You'll work alone, report only to me, and speak of it to no one. Not your father, not your classmates, no one. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." She handed me a datapad, encrypted, eyes-only clearance. 3 months ago, an alert was transmitted through Imperial military channels. Classification level Obsidian, higher than most admirals can access. The alert contained no context, no source attribution, no follow-up orders. Just a series of coordinates and a single phrase: avoid at all costs. Since then, 7 more alerts have been transmitted, all identical in format, all with different coordinates, all classified Obsidian. I felt something cold in my stomach. 7 alerts in 3 months. Correct, and here's what's strange. No one knows who's sending them. The transmission codes are legitimate Imperial military encryption, proper authentication protocols. But when we trace them back through the network, they terminate at facilities that don't exist or ships that were destroyed years ago. It's as if the alerts are coming from ghosts. Routing errors, I suggested. Automated systems malfunction? Yendrik shook her head. We considered that, but the coordinates are always in active Imperial patrol zones, and in 3 cases fleets have reported incidents at those locations. Ships lost to navigational errors, entire patrols disappearing. Nothing conclusive, nothing that connects directly, but the pattern exists. What do you want me to do? Find the source, analyze every transmission, every routing path, every encryption signature, find out who's sending these alerts and why. And Cadet Viren, if you discover something you don't understand, something that frightens you, come to me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone. I took the datapad, felt its weight, and nodded. That was my mistake, taking the assignment, looking into something that should have remained hidden. Because what I found in the next 3 months changed everything I understood about the Empire, about the galaxy, about the nature of duty and truth. I started with the transmissions themselves, analyzing encryption patterns, time-stamped data, routing signatures. The alerts were perfect, flawless Imperial military protocol, proper authentication codes, correct classification headers. They looked like they'd been generated by a senior intelligence officer with Obsidian clearance, someone with authority to issue galaxy-wide warnings. But when I traced the transmission sources, I found impossibilities. The first alert had originated from the Ravager, an Imperial-class star destroyer, reported destroyed at the Battle of Mustafar 6 years prior. The second came from the Adjudicator, lost in the corporate sector 4 years ago. The third from the Inexorable, a Victory-class destroyer that had disappeared during a routine patrol in the expansion region. Dead ships, all of them, transmitting alerts years after their destruction. I checked the transmission timestamps against known ship destruction dates. Every single alert came from vessels that had been destroyed or disappeared before the transmission occurred. Not minutes before, months, sometimes years, as if the ships were reaching back through time, sending warnings from beyond their deaths. I told myself it was a sophisticated slicing operation. Someone was using destroyed ship codes to hide their identity, piggybacking on dead authentication protocols to send unauthorized alerts. But that didn't explain the coordinates. I pulled patrol reports from the locations specified in the alerts, cross-referenced incident data, and found a pattern that made my hands shake. Every coordinate marked a location where Imperial patrols had subsequently disappeared. Not all of them, not immediately, but within 6 months of each alert, ships sent to those coordinates went missing. TIE squadrons that never returned from routine flights, scout vessels that transmitted normal reports, then vanished, corvettes that dropped out of hyperspace and were never heard from again. 11 confirmed disappearances across 7 coordinates, all occurring after the alerts were transmitted. The alerts weren't random, they were warnings, and the Empire wasn't listening. I compiled my findings into a report, encrypted it, and took it to Commander Yendrik. She read it in silence, her expression unchanged, and when she finished, she looked at me with something I couldn't identify. Fear, regret, calculation. "This doesn't leave this office," she said quietly. "But, Commander, if the alerts are legitimate warnings—" "They're not warnings, Cadet. They're test transmissions. Someone is probing Imperial communication networks, seeing how we respond to anomalous data. Probably rebel intelligence, possibly something else. Your analysis is excellent, but your conclusions are premature. Commander, 11 ships have disappeared. Disappeared in active patrol zones where navigational hazards, rebel ambushes, and equipment failures are common. Correlation isn't causation, Cadet. You're seeing patterns where only coincidence exists." But I knew she was lying. I could see it in the way she held the datapad, in the tension around her eyes, in the deliberate calm of her voice. She knew something I didn't, and she was protecting it. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Continue monitoring. Report any new alerts directly to me. And, Cadet Viren, talk to no one about this. Not your father, not your friends. Security classification Obsidian exists for a reason. People die for knowing less than what you've just told me." I left her office with the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake, that I'd learned something I was never meant to know, and that my life had become significantly more dangerous. The 8th alert arrived 2 weeks later. I was alone in the analysis lab, processing routine transmissions, when it appeared in my queue. Same format, same classification, same impossible source. This time, the Crucible, a star destroyer lost 8 months ago. New coordinates deep in the expansion region between Korrelag and Bothawui, and the same phrase, "avoid at all costs." I should have reported it immediately. That was protocol, but something stopped me, some instinct born from months of watching patterns emerge from chaos. I pulled the coordinates, cross-referenced them with current patrol schedules, and felt my blood freeze. Dagger Squadron. 12 TIE fighters from the Inexorable, scheduled to patrol that exact sector in 6 hours. I ran to Yendrik's office, datapad in hand, but her door was sealed, biometric lock active. I tried her comm, no response. I tried routing an emergency message through ISB channels. Blocked. It was as if she'd disappeared, or as if someone wanted to ensure I couldn't reach her. 6 hours. Dagger Squadron would launch in 6 hours, fly to coordinates marked by an alert from a dead ship, and disappear like all the others, unless I stopped them. I made a decision that violated every protocol I'd been taught, every rule that defined ISB operations. I accessed military communication channels without authorization, forged a priority alert using codes I'd memorized from training exercises, and transmitted a direct warning to the Inexorable. Abort Dagger Squadron Patrol. Coordinates compromised. ISB command authorization pending. It was treason, using unauthorized codes, impersonating ISB command, interfering with military operations. If they traced it back to me, I'd be arrested, interrogated, probably executed. But I couldn't watch 12 pilots fly into oblivion when I could have warned them. I waited. 1 hour. 2. No response from the Inexorable, no acknowledgement of my warning, and no word on whether Dagger Squadron had launched. 3 hours after my transmission, Commander Yendrik returned to her office. I was waiting outside, prepared to confess, to accept whatever punishment came. She saw me, and her expression went cold. Inside, now. I followed her in, and she sealed the door behind us, activated counter-surveillance measures, and turned to face me with barely controlled fury. "What did you do?" "I sent a warning to the Inexorable. Dagger Squadron was scheduled to patrol coordinates flagged by the latest alert. I tried to reach you, but..." "So you violated security protocols, forged ISB authorization codes, and interfered with military operations without clearance." Yes, ma'am, but Commander, if the alert is legitimate. She struck me, open-handed, hard enough to snap my head sideways, hard enough that I tasted copper blood. I staggered, shocked, and when I looked back at her, I saw something worse than anger. I saw terror. You have no idea what you've done, she whispered. No idea what you've interfered with. Then tell me, please, what are these alerts? Where are they coming from? She sat down heavily, suddenly looking decades older than her years. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at the wall like she could see through it into some distant horror. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. 5 years ago, I was assigned to investigate the first disappearances in the expansion region. Routine patrols that never returned. No wreckage, no distress signals, just gone. The pattern continued for months. We sent investigation teams. They disappeared too. Eventually, we sent a full Star Destroyer battle group to one of the coordinates. 4 Imperial-class destroyers, fighter wings, the works. Only one ship returned, the Adjudicator. The same ship that sent the second alert, I said slowly. She nodded. The captain reported finding a graveyard, hundreds of Imperial vessels, all dead, all perfectly preserved, floating in formation like they were still on patrol, and something else, something alive or conscious or... They couldn't describe it properly. Their reports were fragmented, terrified. They recovered one survivor from a TIE fighter, a pilot who'd been hiding in one of the dead destroyers. His story was... She paused, searching for words. Unbelievable. But the data supported it. Something was collecting Imperial ships, preserving them, and it had been doing so for decades. The cold in my stomach spread. What happened to the Adjudicator? It was supposed to return to Coruscant for debriefing. It never arrived. Last known position was between Koru Lag and Bothawui. 6 months later, it transmitted the second alert. I understood then. The dead ships weren't being sliced. They were sending warnings. Real warnings transmitted by crews who'd been taken, preserved, collected by whatever waited in those coordinates. Warnings that someone in Imperial command was deliberately ignoring. Why isn't the Empire responding? I demanded. Why are we still sending patrols to these coordinates if we know they're death zones? Yendrik laughed, a sound like breaking glass, because admitting the truth means admitting the Empire's weakness, means acknowledging that there are things in the galaxy we don't control, don't understand, can't fight. The Empire doesn't tolerate that narrative, so instead, we classify it, bury it, and continue sending patrols as if the alerts don't exist. And people like me ensure that people like you don't dig too deep. But Dagger Squadron, probably dead by now. Your warning won't have reached them in time, or if it did, it'll be dismissed as unauthorized interference. They'll fly their patrol, disappear like the others, and in a few months, their ship might start transmitting alerts. And the cycle continues. I felt sick. This is murder. This is duty, Yendrik corrected. Duty to the Empire, to maintaining order, to preserving the illusion of Imperial omnipotence. If word got out that there's something hunting our patrols, something we can't stop or explain, it would undermine everything. Rebels would use it as propaganda. Systems would question our protection. The entire structure could collapse. So we sacrifice pilots to maintain appearances. We sacrifice individuals to preserve civilization. That's what the Empire is, Cadet. A machine that converts individual lives into galactic order. Sometimes the machine requires fuel. Sometimes that fuel is us. She stood, straightened her uniform, and looked at me with something like pity. You have a choice now. You can accept this, bury what you know, continue your work, and eventually rise through ISB ranks to positions where these decisions make sense. Or you can fight it, try to expose the truth, and be eliminated as a security risk. Those are your options. There are no others. I thought about my father, teaching me to read encryption patterns, telling me that information was power. I thought about the pilots of Dagger Squadron flying toward their deaths because the Empire had decided their sacrifice was acceptable. I thought about the collected ships, preserved forever in some dark graveyard, transmitting warnings no one would heed, and I made my choice. "I need to use the refresher," I said. Yendrich nodded, believing I'd accepted her ultimatum, that I'd chosen survival over truth. She unsealed the door and I walked out calmly down the corridor toward the refresher facilities. But I didn't stop there. I kept walking, through security checkpoints I knew from months of observation, using routes I'd memorized during my initial caution, moving with the invisibility I'd learned as a child. I reached the ISB Academy's central communication hub during shift change, when security was lightest. I accessed a public terminal using a dead officer's codes, credentials I'd memorized from archived reports months ago, kept as insurance I'd never thought I'd need. And I transmitted everything, every alert, every analysis, every coordinate where ships had disappeared. Yendrich's confession recorded on my personal data pad. The truth about the graveyard, the collection, the deliberate sacrifice of Imperial personnel. I sent it everywhere I could think of. Military channels, civilian networks, even rebel frequencies I'd identified during intelligence analysis. I encrypted nothing, classified nothing, just dumped the raw data into the galaxy's information streams and hoped someone would care. Then I ran. I made it to the lower levels before ISB security caught up. They'd traced my transmission in minutes, locked down the academy, deployed stormtroopers to every exit. I ran through maintenance tunnels my father had shown me years ago, access passages used by repair crews, routes that didn't appear on official schematics. I could hear them behind me, boots echoing, officers shouting my designation, promising leniency if I surrendered. I didn't believe them. I'd seen what happened to security risks. I emerged in sub-level 74 in a district my father had warned me never to visit, where the Empire's authority was theoretical and survival depended on anonymity. I ditched my uniform, traded my ISB credentials to a fence for civilian clothes and fake identification, and disappeared into Coruscant's underworld. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of living as a ghost, moving between systems, watching Imperial networks for signs that my transmission had mattered. And what I found was worse than silence. The alerts continued. Every few weeks, a new transmission from a dead ship, warning about coordinates where patrols would disappear. And the Empire continued sending ships, continued losing them, continued pretending the pattern didn't exist. My data dump had been classified as rebel disinformation within hours, scrubbed from civilian networks, and anyone who referenced it publicly was investigated by the ISB. But something else happened, something I didn't expect. People started responding to the alerts. Not Imperial command, they continued ignoring them. But individual officers, pilots, station commanders who'd seen the data before it was scrubbed. They began quietly rerouting patrols, falsifying navigation logs, finding reasons to avoid the flagged coordinates. Not everyone. Not enough. But some. I tracked it through coded transmissions, through subtle changes in patrol patterns visible in public records. A conspiracy of survival, officers protecting their crews by pretending to follow orders while quietly subverting them. It wasn't organized, wasn't coordinated, but it was real, and it saved lives. I also tracked Dagger Squadron. My warning hadn't reached them in time. They'd launched their patrol, flew to the coordinates, and disappeared. All 12 fighters gone, written off as navigational error, mourned briefly, forgotten quickly. But 6 months later, their ship, the inexorable, transmitted alert number 9. I wondered if they were still alive somewhere in the collection, preserved and conscious, transmitting warnings to save others from their fate. I wondered if they blamed me for not stopping them in time, or thanked me for trying. I'd never know. Living underground taught me things the ISB Academy never covered. I learned that the galaxy was full of people the Empire had abandoned, refugees from conquered worlds, slaves for mining operations, smugglers who'd seen things they couldn't explain. I learned that the alerts weren't the only inexplicable phenomenon the Empire was suppressing. There were others, many others, entire classifications of incidents that didn't fit Imperial doctrine, that suggested the galaxy was stranger and more dangerous than official narratives admitted. I met a former Imperial communications officer on Nar Shaddaa, a woman who'd been discharged for psychological breakdown after monitoring transmissions from the unknown regions. She told me about signals that came from empty space, distress calls from colonies that didn't exist, automated messages from pre-Republic civilizations that should have been extinct for millennia. The Empire classified them all, buried them, pretended they didn't exist. The Empire's greatest weapon is certainty, she said, drinking cheap liquor in a cantina that smelled of desperation. The certainty that they control everything, understand everything, can protect you from everything, admitting there are mysteries they can't solve, threats they can't fight, would shatter that certainty. So they don't admit it. They just keep sacrificing people to maintain the illusion. I met a Clone Wars veteran on Ord Mantell, an old clone trooper who'd removed his inhibitor chip and deserted during Order 66. He told me about missions during the war, entire Republic battalions sent to investigate anomalies and never returning. Operations that were scrubbed from official records. Clone troopers who disappeared into classified black sites for reporting what they'd seen. The Jedi knew, he said, his aged face scarred and weary. They knew the galaxy had dark corners, places even the Force couldn't reach, things older than their order. But they were too proud to admit it, too certain of their understanding. That pride destroyed them, and now the Empire's making the same mistake. I collected stories, gathered testimonies, compiled evidence that the alerts were part of a larger pattern, that something was moving through the galaxy, something the Empire couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. I didn't know what it was. Alien intelligence, ancient weapon, Force phenomenon. The data suggested all of those and none of them. What I knew was that it was real, it was growing, and ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. I tried to warn people, posted data anonymously on civilian networks, passed information to rebel contacts, even attempted to reach surviving Jedi who might understand. Most ignored me. Some believed me but could do nothing. A few, very few, started investigating themselves, and when they disappeared, I felt their deaths like weights added to my guilt. I saved the galaxy nothing. My transmission changed nothing. Dagger Squadron died anyway. The alerts continued unheeded, and I was alone, fugitive, watching the Empire sacrifice its people to preserve an illusion I'd once believed in. That's when I met Arvin. He was a slicer, a brilliant one, working from a hidden facility on Lothal. I'd tracked him through the network, following the signature of someone who'd been accessing classified Imperial communications without authorization. I thought he might be rebel intelligence, someone I could share my data with, someone who might actually use it. He was something else entirely. "You're Mara Viren," he said when I met him in his workshop, surrounded by computer terminals and encryption servers. "Former ISB, the one who dumped the alert data 3 years ago. I've been looking for you." "Why?" I asked, hand on my holdout blaster. "Because you're right. The alerts are real, the collection is real, and the Empire's suppression is real. But you're wrong about one thing. The Empire knows exactly what's happening. They're not ignoring it. They're using it. He showed me files he'd sliced from deep Imperial archives, classification levels beyond anything I'd seen at the Academy, project files, research data, experimental operations, evidence that Imperial intelligence, not ISB, but a darker division I'd never heard of, had been studying the collection phenomenon for decades. They'd sent ships deliberately to the coordinates, sacrificed entire crews to gather data on whatever was collecting them. They'd monitored the transmissions, analyzed the preservation process, attempted to communicate with the entity or entities responsible, and they'd discovered something. The collection was a test, not random predation, not mindless hunting. A test administered by something ancient, something that had been observing human expansion into the galaxy and evaluating whether humanity was worthy of continued existence. The Empire had failed the test repeatedly. Every ship sent was judged, found wanting, collected, but they kept trying, kept sending patrols, believing they could solve it through force or intelligence or determination. They think they can pass eventually, Arvin explained, showing me research reports written in cold, clinical language. They think if they send enough ships, gather enough data, they'll crack the test parameters and demonstrate whatever quality the collectors are looking for. So they keep sacrificing people, calling it research, calling it necessary loss. That's insane, I whispered. That's the Empire. They can't accept that something might be beyond their control. So they keep throwing lives at it until either they succeed or run out of people to throw. He showed me one more file, classified higher than everything else. A proposal submitted by Imperial intelligence to the Emperor himself, suggesting that passing the test might grant humanity access to technologies or knowledge from the Collector's civilization, that the sacrifice of thousands of Imperial personnel might be worth whatever rewards lay beyond. The proposal had been approved. They're planning something, Arvin said quietly. A massive operation, hundreds of ships, sent to the primary collection coordinates simultaneously. They think overwhelming force, combined with everything they've learned, might be enough to pass the test or destroy the collectors outright. It's scheduled for 6 months from now. They'll all die, I said. Every ship, every crew. The collectors don't respond to force, they just add it to the graveyard. I know. And when it fails, when hundreds of ships disappear in a single operation, even the Empire won't be able to classify it. The truth will come out, and everything will change. Or the Empire will collapse, and whatever's testing us will decide humanity failed, I said. We need to stop this operation. Arvin smiled sadly. That's why I found you, because I knew you'd say that, and because stopping it requires doing something neither of us wants to do. What? We need to contact the collectors directly. Ask them what they want, what the test measures, how humanity can pass without sacrificing thousands more lives. And the only way to do that is to go to the collection coordinates ourselves, I finished. We stared at each other, understanding the implications. It was suicide. Everyone who'd gone to those coordinates had died or been collected, preserved forever in the graveyard. But it was also the only option, the only way to potentially save the hundreds of ships the Empire was about to sacrifice. I have a ship, Arvin said. Modified YT freighter, heavily shielded, equipped with every sensor and communication system I could integrate. It won't protect us if the collectors want us dead, but it might let us survive long enough to attempt contact. When? I asked. Whenever you're ready. I thought about my father, about the girl I'd been who wanted to make him proud by joining the ISB. I thought about Commander Yendrik, duty-bound and terrified, maintaining the machine that fed on lives. I thought about Dagger Squadron, 12 pilots who died because I couldn't save them. And I thought about the hundreds of ships about to launch into the collection, crews who didn't know they were being sacrificed to test an insane theory. Now, I said, we go now. The journey to the primary collection coordinates took 4 days. We flew through hyperspace in silence, checking systems, reviewing data, preparing for something we couldn't possibly prepare for. Arvin had compiled everything known about the collectors, which was almost nothing, organic or technological, singular or multiple, ancient or contemporary, force-related or completely separate. Every theory contradicted every other theory. The only consistent element was the collection itself. Ships taken, crews preserved, vessels arranged in perfect formations. And the alerts. Warnings transmitted from the dead, trying to save others from their fate. We dropped out of hyperspace at coordinates 28.2, 21, 8.8, the primary collection site, and immediately lost all power. Not gradual failure, instant death, engines cut, life support offline, emergency systems unresponsive. The ship went cold, temperature dropping fast, frost forming on the viewports. We sat in our seats, breathing clouds of white, and waited. The collectors appeared within minutes, not one ship, dozens. The organic vessels I'd read about in reports, purple, black, and impossible, flowing through space like living things. They surrounded us, arranged in a sphere, and I felt pressure against my mind. Not painful, not invasive, just present. An awareness, observing us, evaluating us. Then came the voice, not spoken, not transmitted, but existing directly in thought. You came willingly, why? I forced myself to speak, not knowing if it would hear. We came to communicate, to understand what you want from us, to ask why you're testing humanity and how we can pass. Silence. Then, humanity is not being tested. Humanity is being documented. I don't understand. We are archivists. We preserve civilizations at their peak, before collapse, before extinction. Your empire expands aggressively, consumes resources, wages endless war. This is the pattern of civilizations that destroy themselves. We collect representatives before the inevitable fall, preserve them perfectly so that something of your species survives what comes next. Horror settled over me. You're not testing us. You're recording us before we go extinct. Correct. Your empire will fall. Rebellions grow. Internal corruption spreads. Unsustainable expansion guarantees collapse. Within 1 generation, perhaps 2, your civilization will fragment. We collect samples now while you still exist as a cohesive entity. When future archaeologists explore your ruins, our archive will be the only complete record of what humanity was. But the alerts, Arvin said, his voice shaking, the warnings from collected ships, why send those if you're just documenting? We send no warnings. The collected sometimes retain consciousness, remain aware within preservation. They transmit desperately, trying to warn others. We do not prevent it. Their behavior is part of the documentation. Fear, hope, loyalty to species, all preserved. I felt sick. The alerts weren't coming from the collectors. They were coming from the crews they'd taken. People preserved in whatever process kept them alive. Conscious, aware, trapped forever while they watched others being collected. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, transmitting warnings that the Empire ignored. You're wrong, I said. The Empire isn't going to collapse. And even if it does, humanity will survive. We're resilient, adaptable. All dying species believe themselves exceptional. You are not. The pattern is invariable. We have documented 743 civilizations. All believed they were different. All followed the same trajectory: expansion, exploitation, collapse. Your empire is no different. Then why preserve us? Arvin demanded. If we're just another pattern, another dying species, why bother? Because consciousness is rare. Because intelligent life, even flawed and self-destructive, deserves record. Because when your species is extinct and your worlds are dust, something should remain to prove you existed. That is our purpose. We are the last witnesses. The organic ships began moving closer, and I felt the temperature drop further. They were going to collect us, add us to the archive, preserve us like all the others. I'd be conscious, aware, trapped in whatever process they used, watching for decades or centuries as more ships were taken, more crews collected. Wait, I said desperately. If you're archivists, then you value knowledge, yes? Information, documentation. Correct. Then let me make a deal. Don't collect us. Let us return to the Empire, warn them properly with evidence they can't ignore. Let humanity know what's coming, what you've seen in 743 civilizations. Give us a chance to break the pattern. If we fail, if we collapse like you predict, then you've lost nothing. You can collect the remnants. But if we succeed, if we prove you wrong, you'll have documented something unprecedented, the first species to survive its own expansion. Silence, long stretching silence while the organic ships hovered considering. You believe your species can change? The voice finally asked. I believe we deserve the chance to try. Hope is common among dying species. Hope changes nothing. Then prove it, I challenged. If we're just another pattern, then giving us information won't alter the outcome. But if there's even a possibility we're different, wouldn't that be worth documenting? The first species to receive your warning and actually heed it. More silence. The pressure against my mind increased, feeling like the collectors were analyzing us at depths I couldn't comprehend. Then, abruptly, our ship's power returned. Life support kicked on, warmth flooding back, systems coming online. We accept your proposal, the voice said. You may return. You may share what we have told you. We predict you will be ignored, dismissed, or classified. Your empire will continue its trajectory, but we will observe. If you prove us wrong, if humanity survives its pattern, we will document that instead, a more interesting archive. Thank you, I breathed. Do not thank us. We are not saving you. We are observing whether you can save yourselves. The outcome does not concern us. Only the documentation. The organic ships withdrew, creating an opening in their sphere. Arvin immediately fired up the engines, and we jumped to hyperspace before they could change their collective mind. We spent the journey back arguing about what to do with what we'd learned. Arvin wanted to release everything publicly, force the Empire to acknowledge the truth through sheer information saturation. I argued for strategic distribution, feeding data to rebel networks, sympathetic officers, anyone who might actually use it rather than suppress it. In the end, we did both. We dumped everything to the HoloNet, full documentation of the collectors, their purpose, their prediction about humanity's collapse. We sent detailed files to every rebel cell we could identify, every opposition group, every independent system, and we transmitted it directly to Imperial Command, to the Emperor himself, with a simple message. Stop the operation. Stop the testing. They're not testing us. They're documenting our extinction. We can prove it. The response was swift and brutal. Imperial intelligence classified everything within hours. Our transmission was labeled rebel propaganda. Our data dismissed as sophisticated forgery. They arrested officers who'd shared it, executed pilots who'd referenced it, and scrubbed every public mention from civilian networks. The operation we'd tried to prevent went forward on schedule. 400 Imperial vessels sent simultaneously to collection coordinates, attempting to overwhelm or destroy the collectors. 372 ships disappeared, added to the archive, preserved forever, their crews conscious and aware while the collectors documented another example of humanity's self-destructive pattern. 28 ships returned, damaged and traumatized, their crews reporting horrors I still can't fully process from the fragmented reports that leaked. The operation was classified Obsidian level, officially declared a success, and never mentioned again in Imperial records. But something changed. Not officially, not publicly, but quietly. Throughout the Imperial military, officers began privately sharing the collector data, warning their crews, rerouting patrols away from flagged coordinates without explanation. The conspiracy of survival I'd noticed years ago became more organized, more deliberate. A shadow network of Imperial personnel who believed the truth and acted on it, despite official doctrine. The alerts continued, but fewer ships were sent to investigate. Fewer patrols disappeared, not because Imperial Command changed its policy, but because individual officers chose conscience over orders. Arvin and I stayed together, running our network, monitoring Imperial communications, supporting the shadow conspiracy however we could. We weren't rebels. We didn't fight the Empire directly. We just tried to keep its people alive despite its leadership's determination to sacrifice them. Then came Endor, news of the Emperor's death, the second Death Star's destruction, the Empire's fracturing into warlord states. Everything the collectors had predicted, collapse, fragmentation, civil war, the pattern they'd documented in 743 previous civilizations, playing out exactly as they'd foreseen. Except for one thing, humanity survived. The Empire fell, yes, but the new Republic rose. Rebellions didn't destroy civilization, they transformed it. What emerged from the collapse wasn't extinction, but evolution. Painful, bloody, costly evolution, but evolution nonetheless. I don't know if the collectors noticed, if they're still out there, still documenting, still collecting. The alerts stopped after Endor. No new transmissions from dead ships, no new warnings. Either the collectors moved on, satisfied they'd documented enough, or they're waiting to see if humanity's survival is temporary or permanent. I hope they're watching. I hope they're updating their archive with unprecedented data, the first species that received their warning and actually changed, not because of government policy or official doctrine, but because individuals chose to listen, chose to care, chose to value lives over appearances. That's why I'm recording this now, because the collectors were right about documentation. Someone should witness, should record, should preserve the truth. Not the official narrative, not the classified reports, but what actually happened. How the Imperial Security Bureau discovered something it couldn't control and chose suppression over adaptation. How individual officers defied orders to protect their crews. How two fugitives went to meet their own deaths and instead negotiated humanity's potential redemption. My name is Mara Viren. I was born on Coruscant, daughter of an ISB analyst, raised to believe information was power. I learned that information is only powerful when acted upon, that knowing truth means nothing if you don't have the courage to speak it. I betrayed the Empire, saved no one who mattered, and probably doomed myself to execution if they ever find me. But I documented it, I witnessed it, I preserved it. And maybe somewhere in the dark between stars, the collectors added that to their archive too. The first species whose individuals chose differently than their civilization. The first pattern that broke. I'm 61 now. Arvin died 3 years ago. Heart failure, mercifully quick. I maintain our network alone, monitoring for new alerts, supporting the officers who still remember. The new Republic knows about the collectors now. I made sure of that, gave them everything. They've designated the collection coordinates as exclusion zones, forbidden entry, and so far they've honored it. Sometimes I dream of the collected crews, still conscious in the archive, still transmitting warnings. I wonder if they know the Empire fell, if they know their warnings eventually mattered, eventually saved lives. I hope they do, I hope preservation includes awareness of what happens after, so they can see that their deaths contributed to humanity's survival. I'll die soon. My health is failing and there's no one to carry on this work. But I've compiled everything, every alert, every transmission, every piece of evidence into encrypted archives distributed across the galaxy, holocrons, databanks, hidden servers. Future historians will find them eventually, piece together the truth. Understand what the Empire tried to bury. The collectors predicted humanity's extinction. They were wrong. We survived our own self-destruction, not because of our governments or our leaders, but because individuals chose to listen to warnings and value lives over doctrine. That's worth documenting. That's worth preserving. That's worth dying for. The truth. I spent my life chasing information, believing knowledge was power, believing documentation mattered. The collectors taught me that preservation without action is just elaborate burial, pretty monuments to dead species who documented their own extinction. I betrayed the Empire not because I was noble, but because I couldn't watch people die when I could have warned them. Most of them died anyway. The Empire suppressed my data, executed my contacts, continued sacrificing personnel to maintain illusions. But some listened. A few, enough. Enough that when the Empire fell, humanity survived instead of fragmenting into extinct remnants. The collectors were wrong, not because humanity was exceptional, but because individuals chose differently than their civilization commanded. That's what I want remembered. Not governments, not grand strategies, not official doctrine, just individuals choosing to save lives despite orders to maintain appearances. I'll die knowing I documented that choice, preserved that truth, witnessed humanity breaking its pattern. If the collectors are still watching, still archiving, I hope they noted it. The first species where individual conscience outweighed collective self-destruction. That's my legacy. That's what mattered. That's what I preserved.